In a world where kindness meets cruelty, watch the touching story of a young girl named Tiwa, who faces the pain of being hurt by a wealthy woman out of jealousy. This true story highlights a father's deep love as he fights to help his daughter heal from her trauma. As Tiwa struggles to overcome her fears, the woman's actions lead to surprising changes for both of them. Get ready to be inspired by the journey of healing, forgiveness, and how people can change in ways we never expect. Join us for this powerful story that shows the strength of the human spirit. I'll never forget the chilling scream that pierced the air that day. A sound filled with agony. It echoed through the spacious rooms of the grand house I had just entered, where I had once admired the lavish lifestyle of those who lived there. But my admiration quickly turned to horror as I found myself a witness to a horrific act of cruelty. A young girl, barely more than a child, had been poured with hot water, and I stood frozen, paralyzed by the brutality I was about to witness. It began long before that tragic moment, with a tale of love, sacrifice, and ultimately, a heartless betrayal. In a small, modest home, an impoverished carpenter named Rasidi. He dedicated his life to providing for his beloved daughter, Tiwa. I often passed their humble dwelling on my way to work and would see them sitting outside, sharing laughter and stories of dreams that seemed unreachable to me. His love for Tiwa was palpable, his pride evident as he watched her learn and grow, despite their hardships. I saw the way he smiled, even after long days of tiring labor. The two of them carved out moments of joy amidst their struggles, a father and daughter bound by love in a world that often turned its back on them. It pained me to think how evil circumstances can twist the fabric of even the happiest lives, leaving ruin in their wake. When illness struck, it took everything from them. Tiwa remained steadfast at her father's side, a true reflection of the love he had shown her. But as the days drew on and his health condition worsened, I could sense the heavy toll it took on her spirit. I remember the day I found out he had passed. The whispers among the neighbors were soft, filled with sympathy, but Tiwa's world crumbled around her, casting her into a hollow darkness that grew deeper. Forced onto the streets, Tiwa was left to navigate a world that had never treated her kindly. I watched her wander through the busy city, desperately seeking food and shelter. My heart ached whenever I saw her gaunt face, the stark contrast to her radiant smile when I'd seen her in happier times. She begged for scraps, but more often than not, her pleas fell on deaf ears, the child ignored in a sea of indifference. It was a year later when I spotted her again, this time in a wealthy neighborhood. My heart raced as I recognized the hungry desperation in her eyes, which glimmered with a faint flicker of hope. I never imagined this would lead to the harrowing events that would unfold. When she approached the trash bin outside an opulent home, my mind raced with dread. I knew that the world often harbored its darkest corners, but I never thought a second glance could lead to such brutality. Just as Tiwa triumphantly pulled out a piece of stale bread, the silver gates of the mansion swung open, revealing a woman who embodied entitlement. Dressed in the finest clothes, she stepped out, her face twisted with disdain as she laid eyes on Tiwa. It was as if a dark cloud had descended upon the innocent girl who dropped the bread, her joy snatched away in an instant. I could hardly breathe as the woman's cruel voice rang through the air. "What do you think you're doing, you filthy beggar?" she spat, disdain dripping from her every word. Tiwa stood frozen in fear, her eyes wide, pleading for understanding. But no sense of humanity glimmered in the wealthy woman's gaze. It was a parental instinct to shield the vulnerable that was forged from love, cast aside for a fit of rage. I felt a weight in my gut, knowing she wouldn't back down. I could sense Tiwa's pain, and it was too much to bear. Once she stomped on the bread, the reality of the situation began to sink in. The woman stormed back into her mansion, leashing a wave of anger as she went. But just as the cruel scene faded from view, another figure emerged, Inka, the husband. He was kind and upright, known in the community for his fairness. I had seen him interact with the less fortunate with warmth and dignity. My heart sank further as I held my breath, hoping that he would interject before it was too late. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded of his wife. I could see dismay etched onto his face as he surveyed the horrific grip of power she had just exercised over that sweet, helpless girl. Yinka, who had always encouraged compassion, seemed visibly shaken by his wife's actions. He couldn't mask the disbelief that marched across his features as his eyes bore into Rugi, the woman who had unleashed such cruelty on a child who had done nothing but seek a scrap of food. "Look at her. She's hungry and has no food to eat," he implored, his voice full of urgency. But Rugi was defiant, her disdain only growing stronger. She called Tiwa just another filthy beggar. I felt my blood boil. The anger Yinka had towards Rugi only reflected what I thought, what kind of person subjects a mere child to such horror. I waited for Rugi's defenses to wane, but I knew a confrontation was on the horizon. The calm demeanor with which Yinka addressed Tiwa captivated me. I again felt the weight of despair lift as he gently asked her if she was hungry. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. The warmth in Yinka's eyes as he offered her a chance for kindness stood in stark contrast to the icy heart of his wife. But I knew Rugi would resist, she'd never consider breaking away from the prejudice that trampled on the helpless. Within moments, Rugi's fury erupted again. "You're choosing this beggar over your own wife," she shrieked. Yinka, undeterred by her threats and accusations, gently took Tiwa by the hand. The sight filled me with hope. It was as if Yinka became a beacon, the light shining through the darkness that engulfed Tiwa's existence. I wanted to shout encouragement, to tell them to flee from the toxic energy Rugi exuded. As they entered the home, I felt a shift, a dark undercurrent raising the tension in the air. I imagined the many rooms filled with expensive furniture and lavish decor, where moments of joy were shared. But little did I know, those very walls concealed sickness and malice. It wasn't long before I witnessed the battle between kindness and wickedness escalate. Rugi couldn't hold back her hatred. She watched, seething, as Yinka insisted on providing Tiwa with food. My heart raced with each moment. That moment of pure charity would soon morph into a tragedy that none of us could imagine. As their conversation became heated, it was as if time stood still. I gripped the edge of my seat, my instincts screamed that something terrible was about to happen, the kind of horror that would shape lives forever. And then it happened. As I peered around the corner, I caught sight of Rugi, boiling with a primordial rage. She stormed into the kitchen and grabbed a jug of hot water. I had to avert my eyes, fearing the scene unfolding. But I heard it, the chilling scream of Tiwa piercing the air, aflame with pain. The boiling water splashed against the child's skin, and it wasn't just a scream, it was a cry for humanity. Yinka rushed in, and at that moment, adrenaline heightened my senses. He desperately cradled Tiwa, whose pain and terror seeped through the air. Her small body thrashed while I felt the weight of powerlessness settle all around the room. What kind of monster could do such a thing? Rugi stood in the hall, satisfied and indifferent. Watching her husband care for the girl she had harmed only deepened my loathing for her. Yinka's disbelief morphed into horror as he realized the magnitude of his wife's actions. "Oh my God, Rugi! What have you done?" he cried, his voice drenched in terror. It felt surreal, witnessing an unraveling so rapid, so raw. Tiwa lay there, her beautiful innocence marred by agony, and all I could do was bear witness to the lesson of cruelty she was destined to carry for the rest of her days. I stood frozen, unable to move, swallowed by the unfolding chaos around me. The horror of inaction loomed large, it felt almost tangible. Yinka scrambled for help, urgency pulsing through him as he dialed for an ambulance, all the while whispering words of comfort to the broken girl. I could feel my heart break for him, for the suffering that now seared into both their lives. Meanwhile, Rugi remained consumed by her own destructive anger, relentless in her belief that Tiwa deserved such punishment. She deserved it, Rugi spat, her voice dripping with venom. It was as if her empathy had evaporated. I was astonished that she could justify her actions in front of her suffering husband. Rugi sought to shrug off the immense gravity of what she had just perpetrated. "You're a monster, Rugi," Inka said, the words clawing through the tension like a knife. I held my breath as the realization swept through the room, a moment of reckoning where he had finally placed a mirror before her, a mirror reflecting the consequences of hatred and the decisions she had made. I felt a flicker of hope rise. Could this finally be the moment when her heart could soften? But hope flickered and cautioned under the shadows of despair. Minutes felt like hours before the ambulance team arrived, their professionalism juxtaposed against the chaos. They flooded into the house, a whirlwind of urgency, compassion, then medical efficiency. As I watched them work on Tiwa, I felt powerless once again, desperately wanting to intervene in a profound way, yet aware that all I could do was witness. The medics' grim expressions confirmed my worst fears when they proclaimed the severity of the burns. They battled for Tiwa's stability as Inka was left with nothing but horrible, haunting memories. I could feel the anguish radiating from him as he held her trembling hand, wishing for a way to erase his wife's wicked actions. It was evident to us all that both their lives had been permanently altered by the cruelty that had spiraled out of control. After some time, when everything settled down and tension receded, I overheard their voices following us in the hallway. Yinka expressed his disbelief regarding Rugi's treatment towards Tiwa. "You've always been a kind man, Yinka, but how could you allow that to happen? It makes me question your choices," one nearby neighbor said. I could see Yinka's eyes harden as he wrestled with the pain of what had happened. "I don't know who you are anymore," he replied, his voice a low rumble as he grappled with his heartbreak mixed with anger. I witnessed tears brim in his eyes. The fear of losing the girl who had become a beacon of hope for him was palpable. At that moment, I realized the extent of the damage caused not just to Tiwa, but to everyone involved. But there was little comfort in their shared pain. As the ambulance doors swung shut, it felt as though his heart shattered all over again. I could sense how torn he was, torn between the agony of protecting his wife from her own demons and the innocent girl who had been utterly vulnerable. It was in that chaotic moment, as he faced endless waves of uncertainty, that I witnessed the heartbreaking toll of a battle between love and cruelty unfold. In the following days, Tiwa's condition stabilizing became a fleeting glimpse of relief for Yinka. But I could see the questions that loomed over him like dark clouds. As if a storm were brewing, the shadows of Rugi's actions hung over him like a prison sentence unrecognized. When doctors revealed something that hit like a bolt from the blue, Tiwa was pregnant, it ignited a myriad of emotions within me like wild flames. How cruel was fate! How futile life can seem! Yinka sat in reverent silence as the weight of his world came crashing down. Tiwa, the homeless girl he had helped, was now intertwined with the devastation caused by his wife. This innocent child had suffered unimaginably already, and now she carried a child, a reminder of the terrible act inflicted upon her. No one, least of all Yinka, should bear such burdens. In the weeks that followed, I watched as Yinka stepped up to provide for her care, determined to right the wrongs of the past. I could see how he tirelessly sought solutions to ensure the young girl received proper care. My admiration for him grew each day as I witnessed the depth of his compassion. He rented an apartment for Tiwa, the comforting embrace of safety she desperately needed, while also hiring a kind caretaker. Mrs. Buki quickly became a source of warmth and support as she took Tiwa under her wing. I observed their interactions from afar, breathing a sigh of relief as Tiwa slowly found a semblance of normalcy amidst the trauma. The nurturing care of Mrs. Buki lifted the heavy weight from Yinka's shoulders, allowing him to wrestle with the festering turmoil that still remained in his home. Within the cocoon of that apartment, Tiwa slowly began to mend. I could see glimpses of her hope flickering back to life. But within the confines of that regal mansion, Rugi was weaving her own descent into darkness. Angry, cast out, she spent her days plotting, nurturing resentment like a poison in her heart. I was drawn into her inner circle as she confided her frustrations to me, and although our connection felt wrong, she reveled in the camaraderie. How could he choose her over me? Rugi seethed one afternoon, her demeanor clipped. With each word, her bitterness dripped from her lips. I listened, unsure about how to respond. I could feel the tension rising, the anger simmering beneath the surface as she painted herself as the victim of a story that had turned her world upside down. With a swift twist of fate, I found myself entangled in her web of deceit, supporting Rugi even as my moral compass screamed to flee. I had known her cruelty, the pain it inflicted on others, yet my own need for company and excitement pushed me forward. Our conversations traversed into rumors, the whispered tales of how Yinka was openly spending time with Tiwa. I found myself a willing participant, sharing gossip with Rugi about Yinka's visits to Tiwa. I had witnessed this fractured family tangled in the throes of pain, but here I stood, watching her descend down a vengeful path. Rugi became consumed by her jealousy, listening to my words. And as she plotted and schemed, her heart hardened, leaving little room for compassion. She began to tell Yinka, curious, wary, and suspicious of his actions. What I had hoped would lead Rugi to awaken a conscience within became a full-blown obsession fueled by wild imaginations. I felt the weight of regret churn as I watched this fester, unwelcome knowing that I had played a part in driving my friend further into a pit of darkness. When the day finally arrived where she confronted him, I held my breath, torn between my loyalty to Rugi and my recognition of Yinka's kindness. "Why are you spending so much time with that girl?" she called out, her voice shaky with accusations. In vain, I tried to pull Rugi away. But she was fierce, refusing to listen to the truth laid bare before her. As Yinka tried to explain, "She's just a child in need of help. There's nothing more to it," I felt the tension build. I was overwhelmed by the suffocation of their argument. I needed to leave but found I was rooted to the ground. I wondered how far Rugi would go to protect her pride. My heart sank as she thrust blame onto him, twisting reality in a way that leached dignity from all involved. Days turned into a frenzy of anger and suspicion. Memories of the once happy family came rushing back, visceral snapshots of laughter and warmth now turned cold. I felt Rugi's fixation blanket the house like a shroud, poisoning everything it touched. And as she consumed herself within her jealousy and anger, darkness swept over the halls like a specter waiting to claim its next victim. One fateful day, Rugi fully erupted, striking Tiwa at her haven, those walls that had once offered her solace. The sound of the fight echoed through the innocent space as I stood paralyzed one more time, unable to act. My mind raced with worries of what could unfold, tears spilling from my eyes, as I heard blood-curdling screams of pain drift through the air, muffled by walls strong enough to shield but not silence. I rushed to the apartment, forcing my way to the scene where I finally understood the true depths of Rugi's madness. The sight before me was harrowing. Mrs. Buki defended the young girl, tears spilling from her cheeks as she implored Rugi to stop. But there was no mercy in Rugi's heart. All that she had become surged through her clenched fists as the anguish she had nurtured blinded her. The furious fight ended with an abrupt collapse, the sounds of devastation still echoed through the air, leaving me breathless. An eerie stillness enveloped the room as I rushed to call for Yinka, my heart hammering. The sight of the broken girl, bruised and battered, was where I found the courage to scream. Yinka arrived, his face twisted in horror. The glimmers of hope we had fought so hard to build cracked, shattering into pieces before our eyes. Tiwa lay motionless, and I felt the waves of guilt wash over me, drowning in the tragedy of lost innocence. "Oh my God, Rugi! What have you done?" Yinka wailed, raw emotion spilling from his lips like molten lava. In the aftermath, piercing silence fell over us. The darkness that enveloped the room felt heavy, an unseen force choking out the light. Sylvia clutched her daughter's limp form, struggling to contain the panic that spread through her. My heart sank as I realized Rugi would cast her blame like she had done so many times before, but the magnitude of her actions was unfathomable. It was then that Yinka held Tiwa, the heat of his body safeguarding her against the storm. As he rushed her back to the hospital, I felt my spirit heavy with sorrow. The devastation of their lives became painfully evident before my eyes. I was left ringing with anxiety, a maelstrom of thoughts racing in my head. Had we failed her? Hours turned into what felt like days. Yinka paced the hospital corridors, racked with guilt as he awaited updates on the girl he had sought out to save. I remained with him, offering whatever support I could muster, though the darkness of despair clouded our thoughts. We learned the damage Rugi had inflicted not just on Tiwa but on the very fabric of their lives. Time passed slowly, and the doctor walked into the waiting room, solemn yet composed. My heart pounded against my chest as Yinka sought guidance, the whispers around us fading into muffled noise. As the doctor revealed the heartbreaking news about Tiwa's condition, I felt a hollow ache spread through me that swallowed everything whole. Under the guise of anger, the flames of guilt shared their space. "She's lost the baby," the doctor told us, his voice steady yet haunting. I wanted to scream, to break the chains of regret, but all I could do was process the aftermath of Rugi's rage. I looked at Yinka, his face fell, the weight of betrayal you could see growing heavier. How could Rugi do this? This was a large consequence of a hatred that boiled over. After returning home, Yinka could hold it in no longer. He confronted Rugi with a rage that cascaded over everything we had once considered a sanctuary. "You've crossed a line that cannot be forgiven," he bellowed. I stood nearby, heart beating in clouded shame. I feared they would fracture further under the weight of words, they would be broken beyond return. The chaos tangible, Yinka demanded answers, showing no room for pleasantries. I was a silent observer, my heart aching for the family I had hoped would reconcile and find healing. The truth lay bare, Rugi's actions rendered her unrecognizable. She had attacked a young girl, threatening a life that hadn't even begun. The defiance in her heart stood as an ironclad barrier against the kindness we once knew. "You're a monster, Rugi!" Yinka shouted, anguish pouring from him as I held my breath, the air around us seeming too thick to breathe. Rugi stood defiantly, refusing to budge, the pride that held her together fortifying her against the weight of his words. "This isn't just about you. You've locked yourself within a world of hatred, and now you're staring into the abyss." I watched helplessly as their relationship crumbled, watching the destruction unfold. Yinka had made up his mind, he would sever the toxic ties that once bound them. With a resolution that shocked me, Yinka stepped outside and called for men who were robust, men of action. I felt an anticipation drift over me as I sensed the needle of consequence leading them down a harrowing path. "I don't ever want to see you again," he said. It was the clearest declaration I had ever had, a dignified evaluation of the situation. A firm resolution dripped with heart lingered between them, holding anguish at bay like soldiers guarding a collapsing castle. It was a moment that marked the end of an era, but as Rugi stood there screaming bitterly, I wondered how far she would descend into her own bubble of spite. In the wake of their consequences, Rugi spiraled into a darkness of her own making. The weight of loss was unbearable, but her pride wouldn't allow her to scrape the edges of humility to seek forgiveness. I watched as she called upon a friend in desperation. It baffled me. Whatever connection remained dissolved into thin air. On a detailed journey of self-preservation, Rugi found herself in a harsh reality. The same luxurious life she had clung to crumbled around her as she begged her way through the memory. I felt perturbed by the chaos that grew heavier. She sought housing, but all options ebbed away as Yinka's actions reverberated through her existence. One morning, Rugi returned to her roots, to her past, only to be met with the scrutinizing eyes of those she'd turned her back on for wealth. What had drawn her back was filled with shame, and I watched from the shadows, uncertain of how to respond. Every face carried disappointment, and every whispered word became synchronized shadows lacking just beyond absolution. "You thought you were so much better than us," the village people sneered. I could see them taunt her as she stared Akara with hands no longer accustomed to the work she once knew. As days turned into months, I could see the burden she carried weighing heavily. Rugi remained long enough to wrangle the casual belittlement of her childhood company, a schadenfreude mingled with the mirth of fateful laughter. It saddened me to see her ridiculed, yet a flicker of humility slowly replaced her pride. One day she handed a plate of food to a hungry, ragged girl walking nearby. Memories of Tiwa flooded my mind, the pain she had caused looming over me. The simple gesture caused a ripple of change within Rugi, small yet profound. "Thank you, Ma," the little girl said softly, and the gesture became a thread of light. It was an opening. I watched Rugi step back, her emotions shimmering, and I hoped the kindness would trickle into something greater. In her desperate need for redemption, perhaps she could find a way to reconcile her past. But her triumph over pride was short-lived. One afternoon, as she stood in line to serve Akara, I caught wind of some unbearable gossip drifting upon the air. "Did you hear? It began. Yinka plans to marry that girl, the one he saved." Rugi's past spills over into their future. Despair knotted my gut. How could fate take her so cruelly? It felt like a cosmic retribution, and I couldn't bear to watch Rugi react, but I remained tethered, unable to remove myself from the unfolding drama. The devastation etched in Rugi's face was palpable, every word a dagger to her wounded heart. As the realization settled in, she had to confront her demons, laced with a humble understanding of the pain she had caused. One evening, with determination composed of desperation, I accompanied Rugi as she decided to seek forgiveness. Her journey was arduous, tears spilling as she reflected on her hatred, at last discerning the lines of remorse. I watched her fumble with the timing, her heart torn with fear, but she pressed on, ready to face Tiwa. When we arrived at the apartment, I offered to stay back, fearful of witnessing an emotional wreckage continue or a bond break anew. It was simply too much. But Rugi insisted she needed to do this alone. I watched as she hesitated before knocking on the door, the shadows reflected on her face revealing her internal struggle. When Tiwa opened the door, my heart broke at the sight, so innocent, yet such pain etched into her being. Rugi's brokenness met Tiwa's quiet strength that day, even as the echo of past hatred hung in the air. "Tiwa, I'm so sorry," Rugi sobbed, falling to her knees, stripped of the pride that had once consumed her. Tiwa stood silent for a moment, the bittersweet weight of the past loomed heavy in the air. But I could see it, a flicker of understanding. Perhaps the pain of the past could build toward a future of healing. As I watched from the shadows, I felt the glimmers of hope. Could they create new beginnings from old wounds? "I'll try to forgive you," Tiwa finally spoke, her voice steady despite the tremors of pain that swirled beneath. The delicate balance hung in the air, a fragile promise of change. I sensed a shift within Rugi, a warmth that had been absent. Maybe, just maybe, light could seep into the darkness that enveloped them. Then, unmistakably, Yinka appeared, and I could feel the electricity charge through the air. He stood before them, calm yet commanding, revealing he had been watching. It was a revealing moment that broke all ties to the past. He didn't come to admonish or chastise, but instead, to guide, a symbol of reconciliation. I silently held my breath as he spoke gently. "There was never a wedding. I wanted to test your heart, Rugi." I watched as hope flickered anew in her eyes. Redemption's embrace took hold, and for the first time, the warmth began to radiate through the chilling shadows they had cast. As the sun cast its golden glow, Yinka stretched his arms wide, offering embrace. "You may return, you are still my wife. But you must change." The clarity of his words cemented a sense of unity, bonding them as a family, yet reminding Rugi of the journey required. I watched as tears pooled in all three pairs of eyes. A shared pain could yield recovery. Tiwa stepped forward graciously, offering her own burst of warmth. "We all have our flaws, Rugi," she said softly, mirroring the kindness that had once been stripped from her. In that space, Rugi received forgiveness and reminded me about the power of compassion we had all but lost sight of. That day, as a new chapter unfolded, I felt nothing but hope blooming between them. Healing took center stage. They stood together, as fragile individuals forging toward redemption, a humble testament to the power of forgiveness. As I took a step back, I wished them the best on a journey intertwined with growth, change, and love. Perhaps it had taken the depths of despair for all of us to realize the strength that comes from recognizing our failures. In that space, I began to understand the simplest truth of life: redemption isn't just a single moment but a series of choices, nourished by humility and compassion. And so, the future awaited for each of them, a fair chance to rebuild what once felt irrevocably lost. The end. I hope you enjoyed the story. If so, please like the video, comment what you learned from the story, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more enchanting stories just like this one. Thank you.